We're talking today with Paul Chardoul of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Paul, begin with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Waterloo, Iowa on August 17th, 1939.
All right. Did you grow up in Iowa or did you move around?
Lived there till I was 11 years old, then moved to Flint.
Okay. And what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My dad was a realtor in Iowa, and when we moved to Flint, he set up another realty firm in Flint.
Okay. And so you finished high school in Flint?
Flint Central, right.
Okay. And what year did you graduate?
1957.
Okay. And then what did you do after you got out of high school?
Went to college, University of Michigan.
Okay.
Got a bachelor's in history, and then worked. I wanted to work under a particular person at Michigan State, so I got my master's in 19th century American military history, graduating from that in '64, the same year that I left for active duty.
All right. So how did you wind up in the Navy?
When I was writing my master's thesis, I had to cut down the number of hours, as you can well imagine, and '60s was prime time to be drafted. So I joined the Naval Reserve as a seaman recruit, and this was in Lansing, and I was there for 6 months, took the officer battery test, scored well on it, and went off to officer candidate school.
All right. So basically you were in a situation where you figured you were eligible to get drafted and the draft was ramping up. I mean, because it steadily increased in the early '60s. It wasn't as bad as it was going to get during Vietnam, because Vietnam hadn't officially heated up yet, but it was starting. Okay, so you just got a step ahead of things. And then why did you decide to become an officer?
I didn't like the thought of being enlisted for 2 years, and even though there was a 3-year commitment for officers, I said, I think that's a better choice. With my background, I thought I could do something for the Navy as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you hope that they might be able to use your particular skill set.
Exactly.
Military history and so forth. Okay, all right. So now while you were still in that first 6 months when you're still enlisted, what did your Navy duties consist of, or what kind of training did you get?
You mean as a seaman recruit?
Yeah.
It was just once a week training at the Naval Reserve Center, which was marginally good. Didn't learn very much. Learned how to wear a uniform.
Okay.
And that was really about it.
All right. And so from there, it's on to the officer candidate school.
Correct.
All right. And so when were you there?
I was there from early February 1964 until June of '64.
Okay.
This is in Newport, Rhode Island.
All right. So what did that training course consist of?
18 weeks of combination of academic and military training. The academic included such things as operations, engineering, basic thermodynamics, some nuclear information, navigation, and just learning how to be an officer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what kind of mix of people were in your class?
There were 12 companies, each one with about 30 males. Mm-hmm. Because I got there the first day, I was in Alpha Company, the first one. And the barracks were temporary barracks from World War II. Horrible conditions. As a matter of fact, in March, the back end of the barracks fell off, and that's where all the showers and all that was. So we had to go to the next building over to take a shower in driving snowstorm. Not fun. But the training was fantastic, it really was. And I was able to learn an awful lot about the Navy that I didn't realize that was part of it. The very first night I got there, I was in a coat and tie, and they had us scrubbing the deck. I took my jacket off, wrapped my tie around my neck so I wouldn't get in the way. I'm on the deck scrubbing. And then they ran us off to dinner. I thought we'd get candlelight dinners. We had 15 minutes to run to the mess hall, eat, and get back. And some of the guys were getting a little sick on the way back. It was a kind of a greasy meal. But it was kind of an introduction to things may not be as sophisticated as you might think they are.
I guess you might have seen in movies or something, the officers and officers' mess and all wearing their white uniforms and the stewards coming and serving them.
That's right,
Yep. Yeah, well, not quite. Maybe at the Naval Academy you get that, but anyway, not officer candidate school. Okay, and then while you're there at officer candidate school or when you're signing up for that, did you get to request any kind of more specialized training or types of duty?
Yeah, you fill out what they call a dream sheet. And of course, everyone wanted destroyers. I said, I want to be a communications officer. And so after I got my commission, I spent another 2 months in Newport at the Officer Communications School. That was, it was very rewarding because it taught us an awful lot. And one of the things they taught us was, you screw up, you're going to Fort Leavenworth. And so, you know, keep your nose to the grindstone. And because I'm a person who believes in detail, it made it a little easier.
All right. Now explain for people who don't know, what does it mean if they're threatening you with Fort Leavenworth?
Oh, it's a federal prison.
Right. It's military prison.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, that would be the what kind of mistake would get you sent to prison?
Dealing with classified material and losing stuff.
Okay.
Because I also got my first ship, which was an ammunition ship, and because we carried special weapons, almost everything we did was classified at least secret, and some of the stuff was higher than that. So I took over as top secret control officer and classified material control officer and crypto security officer, besides being communications officer and assistant operations officer. So it was a full-time job and then some.
All right. So what was that first assignment? What ship did you go to?
That was on the U.S.S Diamond Head.
And can you explain what kind of ship that was?
Yeah, it was an ammunition ship. All ammunition ships are named after volcanoes for obvious reasons. And we learned very early on that if that ship blew up, it would basically create a big hole in the Atlantic Ocean. We carried more firepower than what was expended in World War II on one ship.
All right. And where were you based?
In Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
But we were seldom there. We were out at sea. Of the 18 months I was on board, probably out at sea 15 of the 18 months.
Okay. And about how big was the ship?
It was about 30,000 tons.
Okay. So in terms of its length and?
About 470 feet long.
So essentially a large freighter?
Essentially, yeah. It was actually, I found, I was doing a zone inspection, and I found a little panel down in one of the recesses that had been built in 1937, and they claimed it had been built in 1941, but it was older than they thought. I think it was reconditioned.
Okay. All right. And so What kind of reception do you get when you first arrive at the ship? What are your first few days like?
Oh, um, well, the first thing you do is you sign in when you board the ship, and of course you learn to salute the ensign at the back of the ship, at the stern of the ship, and request permission to come aboard, and you have your orders with you. And I was taken to the officer of the deck, who gave me the address of the commanding officer and said, please contact the commanding officer. This was at his home, so I actually waited until the next day because it was on a Sunday. I knew he'd be in the next day. He came in, and I came in and talked to him. He was a full captain, and was an individual who was really quite an innovator. And we didn't. He'd been a former communicator too, so he was kind of watching me pretty carefully. And he said, "We're going to make this ship the best ship on the Atlantic Fleet." And I said, "Okay, that sounds good to me." You know, so we had a very interesting conversation for about 15 minutes, and then he shushed me out, and I went right to work. I had an on-site relief from the preceding communications officer, and that lasted about 2 days.
So that means basically he's showing you what to do in those 2 days? Yeah.
And of course, without getting into some of the classified material, there was an awful lot of inventory we had to do, and that was primarily what we did. And then do a nice burn and make out the burn report and all that. It's really very cut and dry, but very complex.
Okay, when you refer to a burn, what do you mean by that?
You have to physically burn documents.
Okay.
And anything. Let's leave that one off.
Okay. All right. But the kind of thing that could happen if there was some risk of the ship being lost.
Like the Pueblo.
Yeah, yeah. That sort of thing.
I've talked to a couple officers in the Pueblo, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Not good.
Okay. All right. But that's the nature of what you've got and the secret nature of material. Okay. How long was it before you went out to sea?
About a week and a half.
Okay.
Did a NATO cruise into the North Atlantic. I experienced my first hurricane.
Okay.
Yeah, it did a lot of damage to the ship. We were working with an aircraft carrier, and you know what a sponson is on a carrier?
You should describe that for the audience.
Thing that hangs off the side of the carrier. It was about 55 feet above the water. It was twisted 90 degrees by a wave. So you can imagine the kind of waves we were experiencing. We were up north of the Arctic Circle, north of Iceland. And I was surprised to find, even though not only was our exercise, it was a NATO exercise, classified secret, but even the title of the exercise was classified secret. And so we got to a point where we were rearming the U.S.S Independence and the U.S.S Enterprise, the nuclear carrier. And it was in a place called Point Snow, which was just a little dot in the middle of the ocean, way up in this Norwegian Sea. And there's a Russian trawler waiting for us. And at one point, on the primary tactical circuit, I'm up on the bridge because I was also the officer of the deck for all rearmings. Ensign Chardoul, do you realize your parents were killed in an auto accident last week? Now, I've been out at sea for about 2 weeks. I'm shaking. And I looked at the commanding officer, and he just shook his head. He said, I don't know. Um, and what they were doing is they were picking up garbage out of the water, and they found some material and some documents, whatever, and were able to piece together a lot of what we were doing. And after the exercise was over, it lasted about 2.5 weeks. Oh, while we were up there, our radar mast got blown off. It landed on the main deck.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my other collateral duties was electronics material officer. So I had to climb up the radar mast to see how much damage had been done to the coupler and all that. And I'd left permanent fingerprints in that steel. I mean, I'm not a good climber because water, ship,
Yeah.
water, ship, water. I mean, we were really rocking quite a bit. So we went down into the Bay of Biscay where it was fairly quiet. And we were able to, from there, go into a small port, and they were able to put a derrick up and put the mast back, or the radar back on. But after the exercise was over, we went to Portsmouth, England, and all the communicators were called into a room, and we were read the Riot Act.
Mm-hmm.
For all kinds of computer violations, getting information out that shouldn't be eliminated, because the intelligence people were able to basically rewrite the entire operation order based on what they were listening to. So that's when you really become very conscious of how important security is.
Did you call home?
No,
Okay, so you didn't think your parents were killed in an auto accident?
I checked. I by other means. But,
Okay.
we had no way of calling.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the Russians were just messing with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. They found your name someplace and
Mhm.
decided to use it. Okay. All right. So about how many cruises did you do with that ship? Or when you're out to sea, how long would you be out?
We did. Most of our cruises were, just rearming,
Mhm.
out for a week,
Yeah.
and back in for a day, out for a week, back in for a day. Couple down into the Caribbean for a month, and then we did 7 months in the Mediterranean.
Okay. So talk a little bit about the med cruise then. What was that like?
Well, because we did carry special weapons, and there were 2 ammunition ships in the Med at all times. I was designated as the nuclear release officer for about 45 ships. And we got these high priority messages that had to be responded to in a certain format. And it had, we timed it from the time that the message was sent to the time we responded. I was doing it for the 40-some ships of the service force. There's one on the carrier, one on the cruiser destroyers, and one in Naples. And we basically had it. And so the 4 of us did communicate to make sure that we always sent the messages correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it was somewhat traumatic. I wanted to see the world. That's part of the reason I joined the Navy. I never got off the ship because I had to be on board, because sometimes we get 3 test messages a day. Sometimes you go a week without one. And it comes in as a flash message, which means you transmit it as fast as humanly possible. And so I couldn't leave the ship. I had an assistant comm officer, but he wasn't very good. I couldn't trust him.
Okay. About how many officers were on a ship like that?
We had about 24, 25 officers.
Okay. But you still had a lot of hats to wear, and you had a bunch of different
Oh,
duties.
yeah.
All right. And what places did you go to?
In the Med?
Yeah.
Our first stop was in Rhode, Spain. And then from there, went to Marseille, Naples, made one stop in North Africa to pick up some World War II unexploded bombs for a little, sitting out in the desert for 20-some years, they were a little dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They were handled very gingerly. And let's see, we did Naples a few times. Where else? Genoa, Barcelona.
Okay. So you're mostly in kind of the western half of the Mediterranean rather than out toward Greece or someplace
Yeah,
like
we were
that.
supposed to go to Greece, but there was a riot, so they canceled that. And I'm Greek, so I was kind of looking forward to it. I had contacted relatives, and I couldn't give them specific dates because our movement was classified.
Yeah.
But I said, I'm going to be there sometime the next month. And they got canceled. So we stayed out at sea for 25 days. That was not fun. There's not much to do on an ammunition ship.
No.
Unlike a carrier where they've got gyms and weight rooms and everything else, and you can run on the flight deck.
Did you have movies or things like that? Could they do that?
Our movie officer was totally incompetent, and he would mess it up, and he would always get the wrong movies. His boss, the chief engineer, all he wanted to see was Randolph Scott movies.
Okay.
Have you ever seen a Randolph Scott movie?
I've seen Randolph Scott in various things.
Oh, they're terrible. He gave away some fantastic movies to get Randolph Scott movies. And he'd be the only one in the wardroom watching, because the commanding officer would send his steward down and basically clear everybody else out. I want this report on my desk by tomorrow morning, whatever. The junior officer always had to make popcorn. And luckily, I was not junior officer for very long. I'm not in the boardroom anyway, so there wasn't an awful lot to do for entertainment. You're always thinking of things that you can do to improve what you're doing. Plus going through enlisted service records, counseling the people under you, because a lot of them are 18, 19 years old, they've never been away from home, and you become their father. And you better know something about them.
Okay. And about how many enlisted men were working for you?
About 22.
Okay. And so most of them were the younger ones?
Yeah, non-rated. I had two chiefs, 2 E6s, 3 E5s, and the rest were E4 or non-rated.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, think about the time that you spent on the ammunition ship. Are there other particular memories or things that stand out for you?
While I was on it?
Yeah.
Well, when we were coming back from the Med, we extended for a month because our replacement AE was having problems in Mayport, Florida. So we extended a month, and it kind of messed things up. But as a communications officer, I saw a message saying that our ship was going to go into the shipyard right after we got back for an electronics overhaul. And as the electronics material officer, I'd be the one who'd be stuck in the shipyard dealing with the yardbirds,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody else be on liberty. And I had gone 7 months without liberty, and I said, I don't think I want to do that. And about 2 days later, another message came through saying they're looking for young officers to man reconditioned LSTs to go to Vietnam. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I wasn't married,
All right.
so I thought that'd be a nice change.
Okay. So if you had wanted to, would you just have stayed with the ammunition
I
ship
could
for your
have,
whole
yes.
time? Yeah.
Yes.
So they weren't making people, they weren't necessarily moving officers around, at least
Well,
routinely.
for junior officers, the normal tour is 18 months to 2 years.
Mhm.
And I'm just coming up on 18 months, and I figured, it's time to move on.
Okay.
There's something, you burn out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called homesteading too. You get too involved in the same thing, and you become single-faceted,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not really developing as an officer.
Okay. All right. Now, during this time, while you were on the Diamond Head, that's when things really started to heat up in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because you had the Tonkin Gulf incident late in '64, and then in
right.
'65 we're sending ground troops in, and now you were kind of getting into '66, and so a lot of stuff is happening. Now, were you able to follow that news, or did you pay much attention to it while you were on the Diamond Head?
Just peripherally. I knew it was going on, and I had seen the movie Green Berets. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like fun,
Mm-hmm.
And my brother is an MD, and he was ordered to volunteer for the draft in '62. So he was in Texas, and he landed up in Korea as the regimental surgeon for the 1st Cavalry Division, or one of the regiments for the 1st Cav. And he was right up on the DMZ, and he kept saying, oh, I wish I could go to Vietnam. And I said, well, okay, I'll be your alter ego, I'll go.
Okay.
So I went.
All right. So what ship then do you transfer to? And
Well, we got back, as I said, in late December, and
that was in '65?
65, yeah. And I got orders to the U.S.S Chesterfield County, which is an LST.
Mm-hmm.
LSTs are the ones with the bow doors that open up,
Right,
and the
the
bow
landing
ramp
ship
comes
down,
down,
yeah.
go right up on the beach. And they're small. They're 3,200 tons, totally flat-bottomed, without even the hint of a keel,
Mm-hmm.
which means they're going to roll a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This ship was part of a reserves LST squadron that had just been taken off a reserve status and made regular status. They had spent a few days down in Santo Domingo.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, there were 4 officers and 25 enlisted. And when I came on board, I was the 5th officer. And then we augmented to 11 officers and 104 enlisted.
All right.
So a lot of it was training the new people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, and so where were you based?
Little Creek, Virginia, which is right near Norfolk.
Mm-hmm. And that's an area where, going back to World War II, they practiced amphibious landings and they did training there and
Yeah,
all of that. So that's
exactly.
the place for the LSTs. Okay. How long did you spend there?
In Little Creek?
Yeah.
About a month. And basically was learning how to drive a different kind of a ship, because the ammunition ship was a single screw ship that didn't maneuver real well and was big. The LST was 2 screws, fairly large screws, sitting behind 2 blade rudders.
Yep.
But the engines were 800 horsepower diesel engines, 2 of them. So our maximum speed was about 8.5 knots, but no smoke.
Okay. So now you're talking about getting up to a crew of over 100. Now, did you keep that larger complement when you finally went out to sea?
Yeah.
So what did you need that many men for?
Basically, moving supplies.
Okay.
Because I was the 5th officer, the XO called me into his office, and he said, "I've got this stack of records for enlisted people. Can you help me distribute them?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So we went through the records, and this guy goes to engineering, this guy goes to supply, and so forth. And he said, "Ooh, I got somebody for ship's office that he was responsible for." And I said, "Can I see it?" And he showed it to me. And he was he had a master's degree from Caltech. And he had a ham license. And I said, "I think I'd like him as one of my communication people." And he said, "No, I need him in ship's office." I said, "He can't type." And so I said, "Here's a guy who has a bachelor's degree from University of Miami in Florida. You can have him." And he said, "Okay." Now, both the XO and I were lieutenant and junior grades. And he was, I was the second from the bottom in terms of seniority eventually, but, we were friends.
Right.
And so I took this guy on, and he was a seaman. He just graduated from basic training, and we had just installed a transceiver, a small, totally solid state receiver transmitter as an experiment from Collins Radio. And we were going to test this thing out. And he took one look at it and saw what it could do. He also had a speed key. He could send many words a minute. And he said, he went up and checked the antennas, and he said, all wrong. I said, "Well, we've got a 26-foot whip antenna for this." He said, no, we need a long wire. So how are we going to do it? And he said, "Let's go to the store." So we went to, it was either Radio Shack, something like that.
Someplace
Bought
like that.
a long wire. I paid for it. And he designed the coupler, hooked it up to the transceiver. We could communicate with the world. Because this thing, that long wire just turned sideways, and it gave us this horrendous capacity to send message traffic. When we were off Vietnam, we were sending not to Guam, not to Saigon, but to Rhoda, Spain, and Greece. And before you communicate in the Navy with Morse code, you send what's called a nondescript thing. It's N followed by one letter. And he'd send NT, and they'd say, "Go ahead, John, send your message." They knew who he was, just from that. It was, he really, and because he had the ham license, I converted it to a mobile marine license so that guys could call home.
All right. So you're getting the ship ready to go. You're assigning the crew and all of this kind of thing. So now, going to just move us forward here. Once you've got your ship's complement, what do you do next? Where do you go? What happens?
Took it out and just did some maneuvering in the Virginia Capes operating area, just a little bit. Went up to Newport to load a new radar on. They took the radar I had on the bridge off. It had been put up there illegally.
Okay.
And put a new one on that died about 3 weeks later, so it became a seat for the junior officer of the deck, a $25,000 seat. It never really worked well after that, even though my electronics technicians tried to keep it up, they couldn't do it. It just didn't work well. It was a short yard period. They installed a huge bladder at the back end of the tank deck. LSTs have what's called a tank deck, where literally tanks can sit down there, and because they fill this thing with water. First heavy ship or sea we got, the thing twisted and dropped down, broke, and that was it. No more water. Luckily, nobody got hurt. We had a chance to, the officers, to train in a basin with radio-controlled model ships that are about this long. And I got a chance to be able to twist that LST around. Is really quite interesting, because the thing, when you go on the beach, you turn sideways, here's the beach, and you come at it. But before you start the movement forward, you drop your anchor, your stern anchor, and right up on the beach. Sometimes at full speed, 8.5 knots. Grind up on the beach, open the bow doors, drop the bow ramp, and then stuff theoretically can go off dry. It doesn't always work that way, but that's the idea. And then when you're retracting, you just bring that stern anchor in and you pull yourself off onto your own anchor. It doesn't always work, because sometimes when you're on the beach, if you're offloading cargo, you're getting lighter, which means that you're either going to float off, you keep your engines running, and you keep working your way forward. And when you're doing that, sometimes you're creating vacuums underneath the ship, and it creates a suction that even with the stern anchor and those two 800-horse diesels, you can't get off. And they have to use small tugs to pull you off and all that. And we did that once under fire, which was wasn't fun.
All right. But you were getting to practice this with models first? Was that,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so so eventually you're going to go to Vietnam, but there are sort of stages in the process along the way. So kind of
Yeah,
take
we
us through that.
left on the 11th of February. There were 4 of us. They were going to go off together. And February is, well, remember the fog we had yesterday morning? Multiply that by 10. You couldn't see 20 feet. And so the pilot came on board and went to light off the engines. I mean, unlike the ammunition ship that had boilers you had to set up hours in advance, these you pushed a button, started the engine. Well, the port engine worked, but the starboard engine wouldn't. They tried. You couldn't get the thing going. So the pilot said, I'm going down the end of the pier and drink coffee. So he went down the end of the pier, and we're sitting there. The engine people are trying to get that thing going. And I was on the quarterdeck. A car pulled up, big black car with a flag on the fender with 3 stars on it. Wonder what that is. The driver got out. He was a first-class yeoman, and he started walking up the quarterdeck. And I said, salute the ensign. So he saluted the ensign. I said, now you may approach. And he said, give this note to your commanding officer. I said, okay. And he turned and walked off. And so I looked at the car, and I could see somebody with epaulets on, and whoa. the admiral's there. So of course, I read it on the way up to the commanding officer's cabin, who, by the way, was only a lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And it said, "Get your ship out of my harbor, Vice Admiral Duncan." So I had, "Here, Skipper." Oh, he went crazy. "Get the pilot." So I ran down the pier, brought the pilot back, and still hadn't got the engine going. So we got underway on one engine.
Mm-hmm. So how long did it take to actually fix the engine?
A few days.
Okay.
So we're going along past the coast of North Carolina. Now we're down to about 5 knots.
Mm-hmm.
Coast of North Carolina. I was doing coastal piloting at night at the midwatch. We're going backwards.
Oh.
So I turned the ship 090 and headed out to sea. Called up the skipper on the phone, and I said, "Skipper, I've changed course to 090, going due east, because we're stuck in the Gulf Stream." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "When we're past the Gulf Stream, I'm going to turn south again." "So how can you tell?" I said, "I'm taking soundings." "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm measuring the water temperature. When the water temperature gets cold, February, I'm going to turn south." I thought, this guy's an academy grad. He couldn't figure that out, you know. So anyway, we did it. And so the other 3 ships took off. Our first stop was in North Carolina, where they loaded a landing craft utility, which is about a 40-ton boat, on the foredeck. Built this cradle, wooden cradle to set it in, and then we went on to Guantanamo Bay, and there we ran into the other 3 LSTs, and we did some training and had some other mechanical issues, and finally got underway, and went from there to the Panama Canal. And these ships are small enough that you could put 2 of them side by side and back to back, going through the Panama Canal, which is an all-day venture for us. By the way, going through the Panama Canal and crossing the sill of a dry dock are the only 2 times where a commanding officer of a Navy ship relinquishes command of the ship. And there's a special entry that you put into the deck log. Captain, pilot, so on and so forth, has taken command of the ship from, so luckily I was on the bridge both of those occasions. It's an interesting observation. But again, it was an all-day venture through the locks, the 2 sets of locks, Gatun Lake, and so forth, to get to the Pacific. Of course, then we broke down again, so we stuck in Panama City for another 3 days, and eventually we got underway, steaming across the Pacific to Hawaii. Again, slow ships, and be steaming along. We decided to do some what they call tic-tacs, maneuvers, side by side, fore and aft, those other things. And one ship would be sending a message, "I am losing power," and they just stop. We just circle around, figure out what the problem was, and then okay, we got this extra part, you can have this, and because before you get underway, they have what's called an allowance parts list, and spare parts for things that normally break down over a period of time. Our APL was never up to date, nor were the others, because most of our priorities were 13, 15, or 17, whereas submarines, carriers, priority 1. So we were at the hind end of that long supply train. think of all those ships off the West Coast today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's okay. In any event, so then the four would go along, and then somebody else would break down and do the same thing. So it took us 24 days to get to Hawaii.
Oh. And what was the weather like on that trip?
It wasn't bad.
Okay.
It really wasn't bad. And got to Hawaii and spent some time there. I had some classified material. I tried to. We didn't have an incinerator on board ship like we did on the ammunition ship. So I found a 55-gallon drum, and I had to cut it in half and put it on the fantail. It didn't burn very well. It was very slow. And I wasn't happy with the results.
Mm-hmm.
So I put everything in burn bags. And we got to Hawaii, and one of the first things I did was burn.
Mm-hmm.
One of my collateral duties on that ship was postal officer. And they said, set up a post office. Where? Well, the wing walls of the tank deck is below the main deck, and each side are wing walls, which are about, maybe 12 feet wide, each side. By the way, if you want to see an LST, there's one in Muskegon.
Right.
You've seen it?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's ours was just a little bit newer than that, but not much, but essentially the same.
Mm-hmm.
So they allocated a space for a post office, and I had some like chicken wire put up. I had one of the ship fitters weld into a cage, and we used that. I had a postal clerk who was a friend of the yeoman. They both had degrees from the University of Miami,
Mm-hmm.
or Miami University in Florida,
Right.
not the one in
Yeah,
Ohio.
yeah.
And he was my postal clerk, and but I needed a safe, so I took him to salvage in Pearl Harbor, and we found a really nice safe. It was about this big, perfect safe, except in the back there was a hole this big, perfect hole. So I found a towel, draped it over it, had him loaded on a truck, brought it to the ship, put it in, had the ship fitter weld it up against the only people who knew that there was a hole there were the ship fitter, my postal clerk, and me. If somebody could go from the other side, they just basically punch their fist through and get into the safe. But it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was jury-rigged on that ship. Haircuts. We had a person who came on board ship as a barber. As we're going through his records, looked at it and I said, I don't think this guy would be a good barber. He said, why not? Well, he cut somebody with a razor. So he became the ship's laundryman. And another guy volunteered to be the barber who had never done it before, but figured we're out at sea, nobody's, good experimentation time, like going to barber college. Mm-hmm. And it was a space, a stool about this high. You sat in the stool, and the barber was on his hands and knees with his little razor cutting. And of course, if the ship's rolling, you get a bald spot, but nobody cared. So that was our barber shop. I mean, it was, it wasn't very sophisticated, let's put it that way. We got to Hawaii and did some exercises there. One of the things we did what was called causeway marriages. On the side of the LST, there's a panel about this wide. It sticks out and like a little lip, and it runs almost the full length of both sides. And you put causeways on there. If you can't get your ship all the way, you can drop those causeways and then marry them when you drop your bow ramp to a bullnose on the top of the bow ramp, and you can basically build a bridge. Mm-hmm. And so we were doing that in what's called West Lock, Pearl Harbor has several like bays, and West Lock is the furthest one to the west. And then there's Mid Lock where most of the activity occurs, and then East Lock where the shipyards are. And so this is in West Lock, and 4 of the officers were experimenting making landings on this causeway. And when it was my turn, I did it. I got right on there and hit the bullnose right perfect and put it on, tried to back off. Both engines died. Couldn't get them started. We're sitting there trying to figure out how to get this thing going. Finally, they brought a tug, and they hauled us across Pearl Harbor backwards to the shipyard. And I'm on the bridge, and the skipper is there. And I said, "Hey, skipper, look over there." And you can see the balcony of the Pacific Fleet headquarters. So all this brass up there. And he dug down below the combing because he didn't want to be seen. And when I was, after my tour, and I was at SIGPAC Fleet at Pacific Fleet headquarters, I was talking with the Vice Admiral, and because we got to know each other fairly well. And I said, "Do you remember that?" He said, "Were you on that ship?" We saw that and we said, "Oh my God," because these 11 LSTs of this former reserve squadron, when they became part of the Pacific Fleet, they more than doubled the casualty reports for the entire Pacific Fleet. They were in that bad shape.
Okay, casualty reports as in ship damage as opposed to people.
Anything goes wrong. You can try to fix it yourself, but if you submit a casualty report, it usually increases your priority of getting a spare part. If you can do it yourself, or it might require some yard maintenance to have somebody else, some professionals come in and do the work. And our commanding officer did not want casualty reports because he said that puts me on report. Well, if the alternative is not being able to function, you do it.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So you've made it now as far as Pearl Harbor. So now when do you leave Pearl Harbor?
We were there for about 2 weeks. And then our next stop was the Philippines, Subic Bay.
Okay.
And so that was a long, slow haul, another 26 days to get to the Philippines. And we spent about 4 days in the Philippines.
Okay. You've got a chronology here that says 26th of March, leave Pearl Harbor, 25th of April, arrive Subic Bay, and then 8th of May, depart Subic?
Was that long? Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were there, I guess we were there longer than I thought. Oh, that's right, yeah, we were doing some training there, and trying to figure out just what our job was. Very, very quickly, these 11 LSTs were brought over to augment the run-up from about 175,000 troops to about 350,000. And eventually it would be 500 plus thousand. And as you well know, the supply train is very good. The American soldier is the best equipped, best fed soldier in the world, and he requires a lot of equipment. It's not just food. It's computers and toiletries and ammunition and all that. And it's really quite extensive. And that was going to be our job. So we basically became supply ship.
All right. Now you're at these places, and you're in Pearl Harbor, you're at Subic Bay, and so forth. Do the crew get to go? Do they get to go ashore? And
yeah, Subic Bay is the armpit of the world. I went ashore once. You cross a canal on a bridge, and you look down the canal, and you see all the detritus of the world in there, dead animals and just garbage and excrement, and I mean it just stunk. And we got the other side, and I didn't enjoy it at all. So back in the ship, the guys said, "Hey, this is great." And I said, "Well, how about let's trade for Japan?" I said, "What?" I said, "You can have my day of liberty here in Subic, and I'll take 2 days of your liberty in Japan." I said, "Oh, great!" I knew what I was going to expect in Japan. I was very much looking forward to that. So I did go ashore one other time with the commanding officer to get my computer stuff that I needed, and we tied in with what's called Comestafi, Commander Military Sea Transportation Service Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And their headquarters were in Subic.
I think my understanding is Subic Bay was largely drinking and women.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much. And if you were not pursuing a lot
Exactly.
of that, then there wasn't much else to do. Yeah. Okay. So you kind of go through that process. Now, when you leave Subic Bay, are you now carrying a load of cargo with you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we had. They also took off that LCU off the foredeck, and somewhere, whether it was in Guantanamo Bay or Panama or Hawaii, the wooden cradle got infected with termites.
Ugh.
So when they took off the cradle, or the LCU, they had a big 50-ton crane lift it off. They had to break the cradle, and these termites were everywhere, flying everywhere, and I mean you couldn't avoid them. They're just everywhere, and you basically shovel them out. I just couldn't believe how many there were, and of course we had our problem with cockroaches too, as all old ships. You're standing a watch, let's say you're in the mid-watch, and messenger wakes you up about 11:30. You get dressed, and you go into the wardroom, into the galley to get a cup of coffee. They'd been cooking from 7 o'clock the night before, which I won't drink coffee that's more than 20 minutes old anymore. And you flip the light on, the walls have turned from brown to white. Cockroaches running.
Oh.
And you pour pour the coffee in. Oh gosh! And then you go up to the bridge and stand your watch. But yeah, that was not good. And because it was flat bottom, the ship did roll. When you sat in the wardroom, the table had a lip about this high, and the steward would put a tablecloth down and then take water and pour it on the table so the dishes wouldn't slide. And then you sit down and they'd strap you in. And depending on which way the ship was moving, this way or this way, you're going to lose your meal because your chair would slide out from underneath you, and you get everybody's food in your lap. It was different. It was food wasn't bad, except we ate out of the general mess. They didn't have an officer's mess like we did on the ammunition ship. And for about it must have been 2 months, we started getting for dessert dinner fruit cocktail. And wait a minute, I was down in the enlisted quarters. They had cake. Oh, crew ate it all. That was the word from the stewards. So I walked back into the galley, and here are the 3 stewards eating 11 pieces of cake. And I called the supply officer, who's junior to me, the more junior officer, and I said, "You got to stop that. It's not fair," you know. He had just come out of supply school. Knew nothing about how to maneuver and get things. So we kind of avoided him, and he avoided us. But anyway, the night before we were going to make our first trip to Vietnam, I had a ham radio, or a little
A transistor radio?
transistor, but it was shortwave.
Okay. And
I picked up harbor entrance control at Chu Lai, where we were going. And an LST was in there getting pounded with artillery. And they had to retract early, and so the commanding officer was walking by. I mean, listen to this. And he got all bent out of shape. So we had that to worry about going in. Chu Lai is an interesting port because you go in and there's a river called the Cua Viet River that flows south, and you're coming in and you have to avoid that current, and then make a turn and then run in on the beach. And as we were making our approach, you're going by these several islands, and you could hear the artillery going. So we were all in combat gear, brain bucket, shirt buttoned up, cuffs into your socks, and sleeves rolled down, and flak jackets. And because I was the officer of the deck going in, I was in the bridge, and as we were coming in, an F-4 from the Air Force base that's not too far away welcomed us in. And he came in, and he came over the top of us, went into afterburner, and went straight up. And the commanding officer was standing in front of the pilot house, and he had his binoculars on, looking what was going on. He didn't see us. It was coming from behind. And he got so excited, he dropped down, got his binoculars caught on the windshield wipers, and he's hanging upside down. Exo and I are laughing. He had literally cut him down to get him off because he was going to choke. And then this boat came out to guide us in. And the guy on the boat had a pair of cut-off pants and a cowboy hat and flip-flops. And he said, "You guys are dressed too much. If there's a bullet with your name on it, loosen up." So it was a little better once we got there. But it was, we got to July probably 4 different times in the next 5 months. And I couldn't believe how that place had developed, from tents to Quonset huts to regular buildings. They were laying a log runway as opposed to the one with the metal.
The PSP or the metal planking stuff.
And a lot of outbuildings, and I mean, really amazing how much they had developed that in that period of time, because they were getting a lot of supplies there. There were, at the time, 2 deep water piers in Vietnam, one in Saigon, one in Da Nang. And so these large merchant ships, because that's really the best way to bring supplies, not with LSTs, across the Pacific from primarily Oakland. You couldn't, they couldn't park every place they wanted to, and they'd be sitting out like they are in California right now. So they would break bulk in the Philippines, in Okinawa, and then LSTs would pick up the supplies and take it in, and that's basically what our purpose was.
All right. And that's sort of what you probably needed a substantial crew for, was just handling all of that cargo going on and being loaded there rather than at your final destination. Okay. Okay, so Chulai is first place you stop. Now, where else do you wind up going? I guess after Chulai, where did you see it has lists you going to Taiwan, Japan.
We went because we needed some repairs, ship repairs, and so we went from there to our temporary home port of Sasebo in Japan. But because the Japanese were not happy with the United States involvement in Vietnam, we had to do what's called breaking voyage, where you had to make an intermediate stop. And so Taiwan is on the way, so we stopped in usually either Kaohsiung or Keelung on the way up to Japan, and with some excuse, dropping off some retrograde cargo or picking something up and taking it from Taiwan to Japan. Same thing going back the other way. And sometimes we picked up some major things. Like we picked up a huge load of bags of cement and these big barrels of bituminous material, which is not good when those bags break and that stuff leaks. It's really a mess. And if we were not carrying wheeled vehicles or tracked vehicles, we had what was called rough terrain forklifts, which are fairly small but very noisy forklifts, unlike the ones that you see with little round wheels. These had big wheels, lugged wheels, and they were articulated. Each wheel had its own motor, so they could go almost anywhere. And we had 3 of them, and they would take cargo out and move it around onto the sand and whatever.
So we basically gotten you to sort of, you had into Chulai, then you went up to Japan. And so we're kind of talking about, and they were talking about some of the equipment you had and your forklifts and so forth. On the first visit to Chulai, did you get shot at, or was it quiet?
We heard, but not no.
Okay.
We did see a helicopter landing, probably, or maybe like, maybe 500 meters away, and picking up somebody. And we saw that helicopter sitting at the small field hospital. And that's when I found out that the person who had been wounded was in surgery 20 minutes after he was wounded. What a change.
Yep.
You know, my master's thesis was on the Civil War. Sometimes people would lay out there for 2 days before they'd find them, if they were still alive.
Yeah. Well, that could happen in combat even in Vietnam, depending on where you were. But yeah, the speed of recovery was big. The helicopter in particular helped all of that quite a bit. Yeah. All right. So let's continue. So what different places in Vietnam did you visit?
Oh boy. Often you're just dropping off some stuff. Places like Phan Rang, Nha Trang. Oh boy.
You go to Cam Ranh Bay, right?
Cam Ranh Bay, of course, yeah. I'm trying to think where else.
Well, you list Nha Trang, Vung Tau, and Saigon, and Can Tho, which is
Oh, that's
south.
later on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Nha Trang. It's the home of the Vietnamese Naval Academy, and so we got some cadets on board, and at that time they were shorter than I am. So to look over the combing on the bridge, they couldn't see over it. So they had to build a little platform so they could stand on there, and they at least they got a little experience on an LST. Vietnamese Navy was sort of the bad sister, as opposed to the Air Force or the Army, and they were not treated well, and their supplies were minimal, and their training was terrible. So that gave them some experience doing that, which I thought was kind of good. Also, when swimming in Nha Trang, they had it cordoned off, and they had boats out there patrolling. Not so much for the North Vietnamese, but for the sea snakes that are kind of nasty.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of thing. All right. Basically, just talk about visiting some of these different places here and what you remember about them.
Okay.
Because you.
Pha Drang, Cameron. It was just a quick stop, matter of hours. And at least at Cameron Bay, when we went in, if I remember correctly, there was a concrete ramp that we came up on rather than going up on the beach.
Right.
One of the things about an LST is because you're on the beach, you better know two things. One, the gradient of the beach, and two, the quality of whatever surface you're landing on. If it's rocks, you better know that. And if it's sand, you want to know if it's round sand or granular. Because if it's granular, it compacts a lot more than if it's round. But round, you have a lot more moisture in it. So, you have to know all these things. And so sometimes we send somebody out with a pipe and take a sample and look and go down about a foot and see what the composition of the ground was, which is kind of interesting to do.
Yeah. Okay. But at Cameron, at least you had something.
Yeah.
Well, Cameron was a big
more
base.
concrete.
Yeah, they had a big base, so they had probably a little bit better developed as far as that kind of thing goes. Now, in your notes, you refer to this trip as sort of the Saigon Milk Run.
Okay, that was after we came back from Japan, our first trip to Sasebo.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I see. Yeah.
We went to Saigon, and we loaded cargo, and of course we had no idea where we were going. Again, on the ammunition ship, all our operations were classified secret or higher. This was often a telephone call or an unclassified message saying, go to such a place and drop off X amount of material. And sometimes they'd change our orders after we got underway. Oh, don't take it here, take it there. Which meant that because one of my collateral duties as postal officer, I had to try to get the mail. Well, if they've changed your next port, your mail's here and you're here. And we'd go sometimes quite a long time between mail deliveries because of that. Mail is a real morale booster. When they'd pass mail call, you could see the guys get their mail, and some of them would share their letters with other people. Other people, you'd see them take their one letter, and they go off the corner and read it, and read it, and read it over and over and over again. And some didn't get any mail. And those are the ones you really had to feel sorry for. When we augmented from 25 to 110, as we're going through the records, I'd say the majority of the new people were volunteers. The choice was the brig, bad conduct discharge, or civilian jail. So they said, oh, I'll go to Vietnam.
So these are people who were in the Navy and in trouble, and so those
Yeah.
are their options. Yeah. Okay.
So they're sort of the dregs, but they pull together beautifully on board ship. I was very, very pleased with how cohesive that ship was. It was a team. It was a real team.
Okay. Well, now, were your college graduates part of that group, or did you have those earlier? Because you mentioned
They were some of the first ones on board. No,
Okay.
they were not trouble
they were
wakers,
regular
Yeah.
recruits. Yeah.
As far as I know, they're just the three, and they were all my people. So
Right.
it was kind of neat.
Well, they would have been closer to your age and had a little more experience. And
Yeah, but because of the standard thing about no fraternization, we couldn't go on liberty with them. And my Rademan with a master's degree from Caltech, he kind of lost it, and he had some pretty nasty liberty because of it. And he got broken twice.
reduced in rank. Yeah.
And then he went in the Merchant Marine. We communicate still. And last time I talked to him was about 2 years ago. He's retired now, living in California. We've had 6 reunions. Most of the officers and some of the enlisted. And one of the my corpsman, because I also had the corpsman, he was a E6 corpsman, came on 3 of my trips. I take people on trips to different parts of the world now, and he came on 3 of them with his wife. So that's kind of neat.
All right. Kind of wind our way back around. So you.
Okay, back to Mekong Milk Run.
On the milk
yeah.
run. So is the idea that you load up supplies at Saigon and then distribute them other places?
Yeah. To go up to Saigon, you need a pilot, and you pick up the pilot at Vung Tau. It's a fairly protected area, and there's always a few ships there, and you go up one of 2 rivers to get to Saigon, and you pass what's called the RSSG, the Rungsat Special Zone, which is a free fire zone. If anything's moving there, it's a target. And so we had 2 old 50 caliber machine guns that we installed on the bridge wings, and got a chance to fire those. They didn't work very well. They jam up all the time, but you could take down a 4-inch tree at a couple hundred yards. I mean, it's mean weapons, really mean weapons. And we had 2 small 30 caliber machine guns that were down below. But we had the 40 millimeter cannon, open mount, 1 forward, 1 aft. When we were experimenting with the forward one, we were out at sea coming across. You drop a target, you drop a barrel in the water, and then you shoot at it. They couldn't hit it worth a darn. The gunfire director didn't work. So there was basically, try to aim it, and they never could. And then they found out that the cutout cams didn't work. So if you're tracking something and you're firing, it could take out the bridge. So the commanding officer said, don't give me any ammunition. So we're going up the rivers. You have this steel plate in front about that thick, not very thick. the guy sitting there, the loader, the range guy, and all that, 5 guys on the team, they're open from the side. So if you don't have any ammunition in there, why have those guys out there with possibility of getting hit? But he said, well, because they don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes, they did. Oh, yes, they did. They knew everything what we were doing. Again, going back to the ammunition ship, movement's classified.
Mm-hmm.
Go ashore and get some clothing made or something like that. Oh, yeah, your next port is such and such. They knew.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, you go to, even because I spent time in the embassy in Saigon, you'd see a lot of the staff people were Vietnamese. I don't know how well they were vetted and who they talked to and what their communication, what their connections were and all that. There was a lot of that going on.
Yes, there was. All right. So when you're out on these trips and you're going up the rivers and so forth, would you take incoming fire periodically? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. From Saigon, you go back to
Vung Tau? Vung Tau?
Vung Tau, drop that pilot, pick up the pilot for the Mekong, and then go up one of 3, because the Mekong is a delta,
Right.
and you go up one of the 3 entrances that were navigable,
Mm-hmm.
and the pilot would take you up there because I was the only person who spoke French on board ship. And the pilot spoke either Vietnamese or French,
Mm-hmm.
but not English. We would sit on the deck of the pilot house. Now remember, there are 2 levels. There's where the guy steered from,
Mm-hmm.
and then one level above is the pilot house. And the pilot house had a canted glass like this all the way around, and you got to it by going up a ladder on the outside of the ship. We took the glass out in case, because bullets would come through. You hear them going through. So we'd sit on the deck, and he had these old French Army maps from '54.
Mm-hmm.
And he would stick his head over, okay, in French, when you get to this snag, come left to such a thing, because they knew where the sandbars were and where all the stuff floating down the river was and all that, and so we'd do that if we were taking any incoming fire. One time we were going up, and all of a sudden the firing stopped, and the pilot said, "Hey, Paul, come here." So I crawled to the back of the doorway was in the back of the pilot house. We looked out, and here's this freighter going by us with a big French flag on it. And I said, "Why aren't they shooting?" So, because they pay their taxes.
Oh.
I said, "Aren't we here because of them?"
Mm-hmm.
That's when I started saying, maybe there's something wrong with this war, But luckily, no one ever got hit.
Mm-hmm.
We had bullet holes on the ship. And on one of our stops, because sometimes we had difficulty moving stuff around on board ship, we were on the beach. I don't remember where it was, where one of the officers called up. I was on the bridge, because you have to have somebody on the bridge when you're on the beach. And he said, this is about, maybe 11 o'clock at night. And of course, remember, sunset, dark.
Mm-hmm.
Sunrise, light. There's no long dusk or dawn.
Mm-hmm.
It's one or the other. And because we're, not that far away from the equator,
Right.
It's pretty much even day and night. I got this call on my phone, and he said, got a crawler crane, we're bringing it on board. I said, what do you mean? So, well, it's coming aboard now. And clanking, and brought it on board, and it, Army crane, just sitting there. They found out that it in fact did, they could start it, bring it on, lowered the boom on it, brought it, put it on the main deck, painted it haze gray, put some fake numbers on it, and then on the cab put a great big target. And that target was full of holes. So they were shooting at that thing. But again, nobody got hurt. We did lose one man who fell over the side. And that was kind of tragic. He was a non-rated seaman on the deck force, and pilot was getting ready to leave the ship. We just come back from Saigon, and he was going to get on the pilot boat. And I said, Captain Pilot, I have your accommodation ladder on the starboard side. He said, oh no, I always go off on the port side. And I said, it'll take me 3 hours to get that re-rigged on the port side. Well, he said, the pilot boat's coming, just put a Jacob's ladder over the side. You know Jacob's ladder?
Explain that further.
Okay, Jacob's ladder is metal rungs on a chain link sides, and it rolls up, and you just drop it.
Right.
And. So there are some stanchions they hooked it to, and dropped it over, and the seaman dropped it over, and when he went down, it twisted. So he reached over to undo it, and the railing broke. He fell in. I'm watching him go in. Left full rudder, all stop. Put a boat in the water, sound 7 short blasts in the ship's whistle. Hoist Oscar flag. And then the commanding officer said, I've got it. So I turned to the quartermaster, who has his quartermaster log, and said, write down everything he said. Right full rudder. No, wait. All engines ahead. Where are your engines? He's writing it all down. We never did get him. We were in Canto, which is on the Bassac River. Got a message. Somebody washed ashore. Do you want to identify the body? So I had to get some classified material in Saigon. So I told Skipper I'd go. And I said I need to take my corpsman with me to identify the body. And I need to take my postal clerk with me to find where our mail is. So we got a flight from Canto to Saigon, Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and it was pouring rain. I mean, you've never been in a tropical rain. It's degrading. It just melts you. And we got off, and there was all this metal sheeting on the runway, or the tarmac, we call it. And I looked around, and I saw all these orange bags of mail just sitting out there in the rain. I looked at my postal clerk, and I said, I think one of those is ours? He said, I don't know. I said, go look. So he went to look, and I got to go to Saigon, or get into Saigon, and it's a few miles in. So we got a ride into Saigon, and I went to 3 morgues. Couldn't find it. Finally, tried to call a few other morgues, and nothing happened. Finally, someone said, "There's a body at Tan Son Nhut, but you can't go because it's dark. You can't. Nothing's flying." So went around, looked around for a hotel. Here we are in downtown Saigon, Metropole Hotel. I said, I've heard of that. That's where all the news correspondents were. So we walked in, and I said, I'd like a room for 3 guys. And they said, that'll be $75, or I can't remember. I think that was about the amount. In military pay certificates, MPCs. I reached my wallet. I had a $5 MPC. I dug down deep in my wallet. I found a $20 greenback. I said, this is all I got. I got change back. You know where that money went. Black market, just like that. So we had this beautiful corner room, and it was on the 7th floor. It was, then we went up to the restaurant. It was on the 8th and 9th floor, whatever it was. And we watched the mortar fire in the distance and had a couple drinks. And, you know, I could afford to be, my 2 guys had no money at all. And to fly from Canton to Saigon, you're supposed to have survival knife and brain bucket and you know all these other things. Didn't have any of that stuff. Had our uniform on. So went out to Tan Son Nhut the next day and found a body, found the morgue, and the guy said, "You don't want to see it." I said, "That's what I'm here for." So he opened up the cabinet, and our sailor that fell in was an Italian kid who had a full beard and a lot of hair, full body hair. It was all bloated. Skin had turned green with blood oozing out. Crabs had gotten to his face. You couldn't recognize him. I had the corpsman come in to check his, you know, maybe to see his teeth or something, and he threw up. Wrap him up, send him home. That's all we could do. We found some mail. I did my run to the, you know, I got my computer stuff or crypto stuff, and then we went back, trying to get a flight back. And there was an Army major who was also trying to get a flight to Canton. So he said, "Follow me, and we're going to get one together." I said, "Okay." So found out that there was a helicopter going to fly someplace. He said, I'll take that helicopter. And the enlisted guy said, "No, sir, it's helicopter. It's a white knight." He said, "Good. I'm a white knight. I'm taking the helicopter." And so, well, okay. He said, and this lieutenant here, Lieutenant J.G., is the commanding officer of a ship. He's got to get it underway. I wasn't. But what did the E2 go? No. You know. So we got on, or we're getting on, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm bringing my counterpart with me." No Vietnamese. He said, "Where I go, he goes." Oh, and he's got 2 live chickens in a bag. So we got on this helicopter. It was a Huey. They're so noisy. They gave me earplugs, but we had made one firing run. I got to see what an M60 can do. That is a nasty weapon, and very noisy. Made a circle, and he did his run, and then we went back to Canton, and then I got a ride from there back to the ship.
All right. I'm kind of looking at your entry now. Do you go back from that mission now? Do you go back to Taiwan or Japan or?
Went back to Japan, yeah.
Okay.
Again, stopping at Taiwan. One time we were there overnight, and got a chance to go to the American Embassy in Taipei, which is kind of neat because, first of all, the road, I have to get back there. That's a beautiful country. It's just beautiful. But it was a mountainous road getting up to Taipei. and took a cab up. It was some kind of special celebration, so they had 2-for-1 drinks. They were a nickel instead of a dime. 20 cents, I was out of the world. But again, one time we made our stop was so quick, we never even came to a complete stop. They just loaded one bag of something on board, and we kept on going. Broken voyage. I feel as diplomatic history, I know that very well.
All right. You got here an entry in your itinerary that refers to Milk Run turns sour. And that's sort of you following the trip where you had to find the missing sailor. It's sort of the next thing, and then before the final Milk Run. So it's like late July, Bentui. Is that part of that same?
What?
You've got your list of things there. Our cheat sheet.
Okay. It was just, we just, one thing, it was getting the same thing over and over again.
Okay.
That's when I came undone here. Our food supply was bad. We ate canned hamburger for 2 months. And there were so many things you can do with canned hamburger. Powdered milk, they never really quite got it all, so you drink and get a lump. No vegetables. The only thing we did have, we had a good bake shop, and we could trade for other things once in a while for vegetables or water, because we were on water hours. You can make water out in the ocean with your condensers, evaporators, excuse me. But you can't make it on river water. And so if you were on water hours, sometimes they'd turn on the water for 2 hours every other day. Well, if you just happened to have watch, you missed it. And when the bulkhead on board ship are so hot you can't touch them, no air conditioning, a little smelly. And remember I told you earlier that our alleged barber became the ship's laundryman?
Yep.
2 days after we got underway, the laundry mysteriously broke. And we couldn't get any spare parts. So we all had to do our own laundry. And so you'd wash your clothes with you in the shower when we had showers. So when we come out of the Mekong, first thing I'd do is I'd aim for the nearest cloud, get out to sea. Of course, they were getting ready to start the evaporators, and pass the word. Showers are now being held on the main deck. Bring your towel and your soap, And of course, then it was all guys. You could do it.
Yeah.
Not a problem. Morale's pretty bad. We had the chance to do what are called in-reps. I was used to underway rep, called unreps. In-rep is where you come alongside, there's small supply ships in places like Cameron, Vung Tau, where you could sidle up to another ship and you could pass stuff over. Our supply officer didn't want to do it because he didn't know how.
Oh.
And we had a storekeeper who kept pulling his hair out, and he'd say, "Sir, please, we can do it, we can do it." No, we can't do it. And he'd come up with some fake regulation. I'd check it out, and it didn't exist. We called him the ghost. He disappeared, John, he's gone. But John and I decided we were going to grow beards. And we got permission for the enlisted people to grow beards. And the supply officer and I said, let's grow beards. So we did this going up to Japan the first time. So we both grew pretty good sized beards. And because I had the mobile marine phone connection, I was fairly well liked on board ship. And the barber would do my underneath here, you know, so it looked decent and nice and trimmed. The day before we got to Japan, commanding officer realized that morale was in pretty bad shape. And so he wanted to take a picture of all the guys with beards. So John and I shaved. And we went from a pretty dark thing to this white. And because he had no hair on his head, he always said, does that beard itch? And of course, you know, the first couple of weeks, it does itch, but you know, no, it's fine. Anyway, that was the one morale thing we had on board ship.
All right. Now you've got some notes here relating to a final milk run, sort of the last trip that you do. Okay, can you talk about that?
Going back up the river. Yeah. Yeah, we went to, there's a little town just north of Kanto called Bintui. And there was a small U.S. Air Force detachment teaching the Vietnamese Air Force how to fly the A-1. Well, the A-1 is not an Air Force plane, so there's some Navy people teaching the Air Force so they can teach the... You figure that one out. The supplies that we dropped off there were also for a Vietnamese Special Forces camp. The person accepting the goods was a Dai Huy, a captain, Vietnamese captain. You know, I was talking to him once, and I said, you know, so tell me about you. How long have you been here? He said, oh, a few months. So where were you before? Silence. Dai Huy, where were you? I was in jail. Well, why? Extortion. So now we have millions of dollars of equipment and supplies going to some guy who just gotten out of jail from extortion. He had his family with him, and we built, you know, you have all kinds of extra lumber. We built him a nice little home there and a shed where you can put stuff in. Even built a cooler for him so he could cool beer, because 110-degree bomb beer is horrible. It's bad at 50 degrees, but it's horrible at 110. And so one time we pulled I had to have a beer. So I said, Dai Huy, pour me one, please. So poured it in a glass, and I put some ice in there. I'm drinking it. My corpsman came up and he said, where'd that ice come from? I looked in the river and I said, oh shit. And I did for the next 10 years. I got some kind of disease. Yeah. When I was teaching at community college, they scheduled my classes right across from the bathroom. I'd be teaching, excuse me, and run across, yeah. And that lasted 10 years.
Wow.
And it finally cleared out, but you know, it was not fun.
Yep. All right. There's a mention here of a Green Beret coming aboard.
Oh yeah. We were, because when you're on the river, it's flowing. Okay. And so we always had a guard up in front with big flashlights. anything that moved, you shot at in the water. We also had the ability to throw stun grenades out, and you know, if somebody's there, and then periodically you turn the screws in case somebody's trying to get on board ship from the stern. We installed lights right at water level, shining down, so they wouldn't shine up. You could see them, and all around the ship. And we had small boats patrolling in the water. And I had to watch once, and I looked over the side, and this rubber raft or rubber boat came alongside, and guys come on board, and wait, well, they wouldn't sign the deck log. They said, "We're not here.
Mm-hmm.
We need some warm food." So I hustled up a meal for them, and we got their clothes off, and got them some clean clothes. But their stuff was pretty ratty. And they spent about 4 hours on board ship, got back in their little boat, and took off. We also had some SEALs come on board.
Mm-hmm.
We had them stay overnight. And again, because they're out there patrolling for us too. As a matter of fact, one time they came on board and nobody knew they'd come on board.
Mm-hmm.
So that got a report going. But we had a roving patrol, armed roving patrol, walking around the ship at odd times.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just for that purpose. One time, because it was a 2-day trip to get up to, what we do is we go up the Mekong to near the Cambodian border, and then cross over on a small narrow canal, a little wider than this room, you know, with branches overhanging to the Bassac River, and then down the Bassac to Canto or Bintui. So the first night, because again, remember, our speed is sometimes less than the flow of water.
Mm-hmm.
We would drop anchor, and of course you drop anchor and you let it pay out, and we do it just before sunset. Sunset would come, get underway again, pick up the anchor, go a couple of clicks down, drop it again, and then watch the firing behind us. They had zeroed in where they thought we were.
Mm-hmm.
We learned that one from another LST, which had gotten hit. I mean, some of those LSTs really got, they really got hit.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I know this is because I decided to write a history of LSTs in Vietnam, and I found 84 of them were involved, total of 84, and going all the way back to 1954.
Mm-hmm.
The last LST actively involved was when the Americans mined Haiphong Harbor, and you know, to get the North Vietnamese back to the bargaining table. And they would not do it until we demined the harbor. So they sent in a whole bunch of mine sweepers. They cleared a path. They said, "We don't trust you." So they took a newer LST, took everything off that had any weight on it, loaded the tank deck and the wing walls with fiberglass, and of a small crew, like 10 or 12 people, and they ran it up and down a few times.
Mm-hmm.
So, so from 64 to 75, 54 to 75, they were there.
Yeah, I think this Haiphong Harbor mining was late 72 because the peace agreement was early 73.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been around the time of all of that.
Yeah, the mining took like about 20 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
real quick. But it basically shut the harbor down. When I was stationed in Hawaii, I suggested that they mine it. And one of the intelligence officers would show me the T-pier in Haiphong. There's a Canadian ship, a British ship, a French ship. Aren't they allies?
Yeah, I mean that was discussed really throughout the entire wartime period, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of political and diplomatic reasons why you couldn't do it, which
Yeah.
was true of Vietnam generally for a lot of things.
Yep.
Okay, and we're kind of getting to the latter part here of your tour with the LST. So after that last milk run, then how do things wind down with you and the ship and go on from there?
Okay, then we went back to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And when we crossed the bar of the Mekong that last time, normally we'd try to cross at high tide.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd clear the fantail because it'd be mud going all over. We'd hit bottom. But we really hit bad. And going upriver, you can feel that something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was both screws, the blades were bent like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be vibrating. And it actually displaced where the shaft comes out to get to the screws. It had bent that, which meant that water was getting in. There's something called the Kingsbury thrust bearing, and that is supposedly is a total watertight seal. It wasn't. Water's pouring into the ship, and we're trying to de-water it all the time. Plus, some guys were down in the bilges chipping paint. They went through the bottom of the ship. You land, make that many landings, you're just running off the bottom of the ship. And so we decided we really need some major repairs.
Mm-hmm.
So up to Japan and into the shipyard. And we were there over a month, replacing the shafts and the screws and putting new plates on the bottom of the ship. And then they put Teflon on them because it was anti-fouling. And it was there that I left the ship.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, was this a scheduled relief, or had you applied for other duty, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. While we were in Vietnam, I knew I was going to be short-toured.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that my replacement was going through officer candidate school. In other words, he was going to be a green ensign.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, make sure he goes to comm school. So that's another 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the XO kept saying, well, if he doesn't come, you're staying on board. I don't think so. I think I got to get off the ship. And he suggested that because I knew so much about what was going on, that I would easily become the operations officer on another LST if I didn't stay on that one. And I said, I really want to get off. I need to get off active duty or off sea duty. So here you are trying to work with the detailer using mail. and all the vagaries of late delivery and all that. But I contacted the detailer in Washington, and I asked for duty at the comp school in Newport.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. I said, great. That'll be kind of fun, you know, shore duty.
Mm-hmm.
I love Newport. That's a great city. And so then it said, oh, but you have to extend 30 months.
Oh.
Whoops. Okay, now what? So I said, well, okay, I'm going to go for the moon. I'd like to be the assistant fleet historian of the United States Pacific Fleet. And they created the billet and gave it to me.
Wow.
I had a master's degree in history and a bachelor's degree in history. I mean, it was a perfect match. And it just so happened that the historian on the Pacific Fleet staff was a commander, was not getting along well with the admirals. And when we got there, we saw why. His history was terrible. It was just chronology.
Mm-hmm.
It was like that sheet I gave you. And it had, you know, there's no analysis, nothing in there. So he was responsible for writing the command history. Now the command history, because there are some 200 under commands, ship and shore commands that report to Pacific Fleet headquarters, you take that input and you write your history from them. And you just take that and add it, take that and add it. And nobody wrote decent command histories then.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a summary of what they had done.
Right.
He also was responsible for a monthly summary report, which was a, you know, what works, what doesn't work. And when we got there in late September of 1966, both the new commander and me, we saw what he had done, and I mean, it had no validity at all. And so the commander, who had written a couple bestsellers, one of them is still in publication, The Big E on the Old Enterprise. Naval Institute has been republishing it over and over again. And he also won $64,000 on $64,000 question, because he has been teaching English at University of Miami. And so they recalled him to active duty, promised him that he'd get his 4th stripe, and that he'd be back in flying status, neither of which they lived up to. We decided we'd, you know, redo everything. So we went back and rewrote the 63, the 64, and 65 histories, and then did the 66 new one, and got up to June of 67 when I left. And then I took over the monthly summary report that was about 7 months in arrears. Well, it has no validity. You're talking about something that happened that far back. It took me a couple months to get it up to speed, but we went from a 12-page, basically Xerox thing with really poor pictures to a 48-page 4-color with a lot of analysis. And the first time I had it done, the day after the end of the month, chopped through all the various offices, because I did it as they needed to be done, and sent it off. And copy number 1 went to Bobby Kennedy. Of course, I kept asking, does he have a clearance? Shh, don't talk about it. There were only like 22 copies made. It was classified, as the history was, secret with top secret addenda. But we started bringing other people in to help. I knew nothing about bomb damage assessment. So I was at the BOQ bar, and I saw this guy with his wings on. I said, "What are you doing?" "Waiting for my ship." "When's it coming in?" "I don't know, about 4 months." "Got a job for you." So he did BDA for me. Another guy who did gunfire support for me. Another guy who did supply, and I basically coordinated and then did the analysis part and worked with the intelligence people, and was able to put together a good thing. We even took over the computer people on board, the staff, and the graphics people. Had our own driver, had our own admin person who did setting up all the whatever admin stuff we had. We went from a staff of 2 plus 1 typist. And by the way, this Commander Stafford, his handwriting was worse than mine. It was a round scrawl. His wife could read it, I could read it, and our yeoman could read it. That was about it. I should have brought in a couple of books that he wrote. He wrote for me, so we went from the 3 of us to a staff of over 100. There were people who were already there. They're not doing anything. Got them busy, and we got this thing done. And it was. I felt good about that. That we really accomplished a lot. And then when I left active duty, I had to write a job description code. I was replaced by 3 civilians, each of whom had a GS rating higher than I was as Lieutenant JG. But we put in long hours. I was used to that. And that's not untypical of uniformed services. Doing active duty for training in the Pentagon, and you see all the civilians go at 4:30. And when do you leave? When the work's done. 8, 9, 10 o'clock,
Now, you had mentioned before when we were not on camera earlier, talking about an incident that, I guess, it made it sound like you would attend regular briefings or other sessions that the admirals had, or that kind of. That's part of your job as well, was to record that kind of.
Because that's how I got a lot of the information.
Okay. And you mentioned at one point getting yourself in trouble.
Oh, okay. I was. I had read about several flyers who, by the way, they're naval aviators, they're not pilots, who had come near the island of Hainan. They were still in international airspace, but they were chased by some Chinese communist MiG-17s, and they took off and went definitely into international waters. So when that carrier came back, I got one of the pilots into my office, and I interviewed him. And he told me, described the whole situation. And I was writing about it later, and I realized that I didn't know what the tail marking was on a MiG-17. So I called up the air intelligence officer in the Intel Center, and I asked him, and he said, "Just a minute." Click. And then the phone rang, and it was the admiral, a guy had just made Rear Admiral. He said, "Come to my office." And so I went up there, and he wanted to know why I was dealing with classified material on an unclassified phone call. And I asked him who we were keeping it from. And he pulled 3 of my clearances right then. But within 2 days, one of the admirals, there were 2 admirals there. One was Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, and the other was Commander-in-Chief Pacific Area. And then Vice Admiral Ramage, Red Ramage, and Admiral Johnson, the Singpack fleet, wanted to know where I was. And he said, I pulled his clearances, get him back, so I got back in. It was a very close staff. And even to the point where, I'd sometimes be walking in the corridor where the admirals were, and Admiral Ramey would say, "Hey, Paul, come on in." And he said, "Did I ever tell you about my ship?" And I said, he was a submarine commander in World War II who got the Congressional Medal of Honor. And he'd lay out his charts and show me how his boat had come up in the middle of a Japanese convoy, and he and the quartermaster were just the two of them above, shooting at these merchant ships, and he was an interesting person. I used to swim for lunch at the pool instead of eating, and he'd show up. "Oh, you can have my spot, Admiral. I'm done." And he would swim an hour and just go back and forth, back and forth. The guy was amazing. When the person I worked for, Commander Stafford, retired shortly after I did, he became the writer for the Secretary of the Navy, Warner. And when Secretary of the Navy became head of the Bicentennial Commission, he followed him there. So he retired from that finally, the fourth retirement. I'd visit him periodically. His name was Edward Peary Stafford. His grandfather was Admiral Peary. And he had all the memorabilia from the North Pole.
I'm not sure he ever made Admiral, did he?
P-E-A-R-Y.
Yeah, Robert Peary,
Yeah.
Famous, yeah. Made Commodore.
Commodore.
Probably, yeah, or Commander, yeah.
He never made Admiral. So I got a lot of good information from him.
All right. So when do you then go off of active duty?
I got off in late June of 1967.
Okay. And then what do you do once you're out?
Well, while I was there, I took the graduate record exam finally, even though I had a master's before. I didn't take the GRE before. I intended to go back to college and work on a doctorate in history. They try to keep me there. They try to keep me on staff and have me augment from Naval Reserve to regular Navy. And of course, once you go regular Navy, they've got you. And I wanted to stay in the reserves. So they offered me the possibility of becoming the military representative for the Marianas Trust Territory. But I wasn't married. And they said, if you're not married, you're not going, because all you're going to do is drink. And, we don't want that. I had met a young lady the weekend before we left for Vietnam. I had come home to Flint. My parents said, "Oh, good, you can go to this person's wedding." And I said, "Uniform? Oh, wear your uniform." This is in late January. And so I was in blues. And so I went to the wedding ceremony or the reception afterwards. And I saw this one woman, and I said, I like her. So I asked her to dance, and we had the last dance. And wow, that's all I could think of when I was in Vietnam. I got to get back to her. And so I did. When I got back, I found an excuse to go to Milwaukee, where she lived, and met her again. And took my parents with me. So it looked, because my dad had a roommate in college from outside of Milwaukee.
Mhm.
So we visited with him, and then saw her, and I said, "Can we write when I'm in Hawaii?" And she said, "Yeah." So about once a week, let her go back and forth. And my yeoman come in. Of course, she didn't put perfume on him, but he recognized
Yeah.
the return address, and he let me know that she's written to you again. It's funny because I had one top secret safe, and I set the combination, and nobody else had that combination. One day I walked in, and here's Yeoman Corley opening up my safe. And I said, he said, 241963, 241963rd Street. And he said, I figured that one out. I said, you better change it. So I did. I found out when her birthday was, and I sent her a flower lei. That did it. I got home and went to her house. She was living with her parents, and spent 2 days there over the 4th of July weekend. She came to Flint, stayed with our parents, a separate bedroom, and Monday morning we'd take her to the airport, eating breakfast, and I announced to my parents that we're getting married. And I said, when? And I said, December. My dad said, no. He was a graduate engineer. He had 2 degrees in engineering. And he said, typical practical person. He said, no. That's all you're going to think of. You're back in grad school. You're going to be spending every weekend in Milwaukee. Do it now.
Mm-hmm.
So before she got off the plane in Milwaukee, there was a direct flight from Flint to Milwaukee then. Her brother had arranged for church and place for a reception. I love that guy. And we got married 2nd of September. And, so we did it and been happy ever since.
All right. Now, did you go and complete the doctorate, or what happened after you get married? Because you went to Michigan State again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I enrolled there, and I did all my coursework, language exams, prelims, wrote the dissertation 4 times.
Okay.
Typewriter.
Uh,
Make a change everything. They kept changing the committee on me. Finally, in fall of '69, I got called from a friend to teach at Grand Rapids Junior College. I said, 1 semester. And of course, 30 years later, I retired. So I never finished the dissertation.
all right. So you did that, became your job, but you stayed in the Naval Reserve, though.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And talk a little bit about what you did with them.
Okay. Well, again, it started in Lansing, again. When we moved to Grand Rapids, fall of '69, I joined in Grand Rapids. And at that time, there still was one night a week, or one night a week. And so I used to get a haircut every Tuesday night for the Wednesday meeting. And then shortly thereafter, we went to weekend drills, which are much more productive. I had an early command as head of the Naval Reserve Officer School, where I taught courses like oceanography, and one course in international relations. And then most of the other units I was involved in were shipboard units. And then I made lieutenant and then lieutenant commander. And when I made commander, the number of pay billets just disappears. It's a pyramid like that. And so I went, I think, 7 years without a pay billet.
What does that mean, a pay billet?
It means you get paid for your duty on the weekend that you're there, 1 weekend a month. It amounted to probably $200 a month, maybe $250. And for 2 years, there were 3 of us who drilled with 2 units, 2 different units, or we'd be thrown out. You know, it's one of those things. And then you sort of pick up whatever you could, wherever. I became commanding officer of a shipboard repair facility in Muskegon. And I stole some of Grand Rapids people, took there with me. And that was interesting. I had a billet where I was going around the state recruiting for basically submarine officers, going to colleges. I had another non-pay job where I was the coordinator of retention for the state of Michigan. I'd go to a reserve center and just watch, ask questions, and then go meet with the captain at Great Lakes and say, fire that guy, move this guy over here. So I show up at a unit, oh my God, Commander Chardoul's here. And it was that time I saw a unit in outside of Detroit. It was a small unit, and I said, it had some high-powered people in there, but they weren't doing anything. So I went back to the captain and I said, I'd like to be in that unit. He said, I can put you in there as admin officer. I said, okay. So we reorganized the unit. It became a headquarters unit for Naval Forces Europe, which is their 4-star command in London. And we controlled 18 reserve units all around the United States. And we ran an exercise in London the last week of October, first week of November. That I wrote the exercise report. And did that for 4 years, which was a nice bill. I always had one other command billet. I was commanding officer of a brand new unit I put together of a Spruance class destroyer. So I had to go to destroyer school, you know, learn how they operate. And that was an interesting thing. The ship was based in Charleston. Got a chance to get to Charleston a few times and ride that ship.
And so what you're doing with a lot of these units is you're there to augment or replace or whatever. If something is called into duty, then the reserves are called in to help, so the extra manpower there. All right. So that's the U.S.S Nicholson? Was that?
That's the Nicholson,
that was
yeah.
the destroyer. Okay, so that's on the list here. All right. And then I guess and then when do you actually retire out of the Navy?
When I was attached to this unit in Detroit, we moved from Southfield to East Detroit. And it was just taking too much of my time. I was averaging 60 hours a month. And because I was doing 3 active duties for training a year, and one of them was 3 weeks long, the one in London, which wasn't all bad.
Yeah.
But I ran an exercise in New Orleans one time, I went to school in San Diego several different times. And and as admin officer of this unit, and then eventually XO, we, you drill 1 weekend a month, but I'd have a second drill halfway through in Lansing, and I'd have all the officers come in from various places. I had one officer who flew in from Hawaii.
Wow.
He was a United pilot. He deadheaded in, but he wanted that billet so badly, and it was the Intel billet, and so that worked out well for him. But he couldn't come in that that second meeting. So when we wrote the exercise, or I wrote the exercise, one of the things I did was, rather than keep doing the same thing every day over and over again, like a lot of war game things are, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, London time, I'd have a message go out that changed the situation a little bit. And we were running this thing, and I told the intel officer, okay, send it. He sent it. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang. It's for you. Hello? Yes, sir. It was a 4-star. He said, you know where I am? And I said, yes, sir, you're in Naples. No, I'm flying. I'm going to Brussels. I called a meeting of the military ministers. Stop the problem. Yes, sir. So we stopped the problem. I found a situation where shifting from Navy control to NATO control, there was a gap where something could go wrong and there wouldn't be anybody there to take care of it. And that's what that message was for. And the admiral said, you either get a letter of commendation or you're fired. I got the letter of commendation.
Good. All right. Now, you've also got something in your notes here about teaching at the Naval War College.
Yeah.
Did you do that while you were still in reserves, or was that
Yeah,
afterwards?
yeah. I did that 3 summers back in the mid-'70s. And I found out that there was this possibility of doing that. And of course, Naval War College is right on the bay, head of the bay in Newport. Yes. So it was a course, or it was actually a whole curriculum in strategy and policy. And so there are about 6 courses. There were 5 of us that designed it. And then we also taught some residents there for part of a short course. And then I taught a distance learning component of that strategy and policy to naval officers basically all over the country. When you sign up for Naval War College, they send you a couple books.
Yeah.
And so we, to do this, we followed what the resident policy or resident curriculum was, except made some modifications. And then starting with Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War, and work our way through up and through the Second World War. And then one guy and I decided we were going to do something a little different, so we created a whole curriculum using non-Western sources, which is a lot of fun doing. I think that got put on a shelf and never got used. But anyway, yeah, I did that for 3 summers, or parts of 3 summers. But while I was there for one of them, I even got in a movie.
Okay.
Yeah. What was it? What movie was it? Oh my God, I shouldn't have said this. The Great Gatsby. The first time it was done. And So I was an extra, and they were doing the casting at Salve Regina College. I used to date a girl there, so I knew the layout fairly well. And main entrance was closed, so I went around back, got in, and walked up to the desk where they were there and said, "I'm here from the Naval War College." Oh, here. They had no idea what was going on, but they said, "Okay, you're going to be one of the fun seekers." So they gave me a tuxedo to wear, and I had to take off my watch because they didn't wear watches in the 20s. And I always had a short haircut, so that worked okay. So they put some grease on it. It was a foggy night. We started about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was really foggy. And we're in this extras bus, just sitting there waiting to be called. Okay, we need 2 waitresses. So these women in waitress costumes went off. I was standing outside the door of the bus because it was warm on the bus. And I said, the guy that was there, "If your hair were shorter, you look like Mia Farrow." He said, "I'm her brother John." I said, "Oh." He said, "I'm here to keep the local Newport people out because they treated our family terribly." So we started talking. He found out that my field of interest was in the 1920s. He said, "Perfect match. I'm going to get you in." I said, "Okay." So he got me in one scene that we redid probably 15 times. And the scene itself lasted about a minute, but the prep time for each time, so it was almost all night. And they teamed me up with this woman who was living in Newport. And, there are a couple versions of Great Gatsby, but this one was done in the 1970s.
Well, the Robert Redford one, right? Yeah.
And we walked across this beautiful parquet floor, and then another couple came up, and then a waitress came up with a tray of canopies. "Do not eat them," because they're all sprayed, and we're drinking grape juice. But my friend had a hip flask, and so she was dousing ours up pretty good. And then Redford would walk in, and it was I don't know how many times they did this. Finally, they never did shoot that one, but they had me do another thing where they had me with an English teacher, and they had a mic over us, and they had us walk through a crowded room, this big ballroom, just talking. Everybody else is saying mumble, 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 mumble. That's what they're saying, mumble, mumble, And said, "You can talk." I said, "Can we talk about expatriates? Don't mention Fitzgerald." "Okay." "What are we going to talk about?" "Well, we talked about Gertrude Stein, and we talked about Hemingway. It's kind of interesting." And this Mike followed us along. And in one of the scenes, you can actually hear us for about that long. The scene that we spent most of the night on disappeared entirely.
Oh, well.
They shot that again in England. But I got $20 and a sandwich.
There you go.
And I met Robert Redford. And I'm taller than he is.
Wow.
I was then. I've got some back problems. I've lost about 2.5 inches. But
All right. I think we've kind of gotten through your career pretty well here. You've done a variety of other things in community and so forth, but this is primarily a sort of your military story here. So I guess to wind up, if you wanted to sort of sum things up a little bit, how do you think your time in the service affected you, or what have you taken out of it?
probably my ability to deal with people. I think it would be very important. My understanding of technology. I had almost no knowledge at all. I was besides teaching full load at community college, I also was the liaison with the technology staff and our faculty for technology. I got a grant from National Science Foundation, $1.5 million grant for technology at the college that I distributed to various departments. And I had the first computer on the desk of faculty. Unfortunately, I didn't know how to say no, so I was in a lot of teams and committees where I was often the only faculty member, and a lot of it dealt with technology. After I retired from teaching in '99, I became the coordinator of distance learning at the college. So when the college went to off campus, like everybody else did, there were some faculty that were trained, appropriately trained. Most of the ones that I had trained had retired, but there's still some left over, and a lot of the groundwork that I had done with the team that I had created was still functioning, so that made it a lot easier.
All right.
And then when I'm the I'm the CEO of Breakfast Club of Grand Rapids, and they're in the 19th century. One of my former students became a member, and I made him my COO, and we computerized that so that when we went to Zoom, we were ready. Everybody had, we were ready, and it just, so technology is really an important part of it, and not just having it, but understanding that it can go down and know what you can do to fix it and how you can make things better, and not technology just for the sake of technology.
All right. I guess the other thing here to note is that you've done a lot of volunteer work with the Grand Rapids Art Museum.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I also set up a distance learning program for them too.
All right. Well, the whole thing makes for a pretty remarkable story, so I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to share it with us
You're
today.
welcome.